This is going to get me a lot of dislikes, but I don't like roguelikes and roguelites. They're those types of games that I think I would like since most of them are intertwined with other genres that I regularly play or they generally just look fun, but when the time comes that I try them, I immediately get bored of them. Watching someone play games of those genres on YouTube is fine. It's fun to see them break the game and see a bunch of ridiculous numbers on the screen, or generally just watch someone skillful at the game do incredible feats, but when it comes to playing it myself, they just don't click with me. I'm the type of person that likes to do a lot of progress and like to see it stay when I get back to it. If you've seen my Final Fantasy XIII videos, then you'd know that I like to overlevel and overprepare in video games, which is the exact antithesis of the genres. It's the reason why I only play New Game Plus of particular games, namely those that don't reset my level or take away my items. This is probably also the reason why I am hesitant to do a New Game Plus on Persona 4. Because while it does retain the personas in my compendium, the game takes away my character's levels which I grinded for hours on end. The only reason why I have more than 20 hours of playtime in Dead Cells and why I made a video about the game is because it has the elements of a Metroidvania and it's an action platformer, both of which are two of my favorite genres. It also has a lot of items that you can unlock which gave me the push I needed to play more of it. Even then, it's not a game that I would come back to when I'd want to play an action platformer. Meanwhile, Hades, probably the most popular roguelite as of yet, is definitely a masterly crafted game, and it was fun when I played it for a few hours, but it seems to suffer more from the same problem that I have with other roguelites, that it becomes repetitive and boring sooner than I like. It's also presented in an isometric perspective, which isn't really my preference when it comes to video games. It's definitely a good game, don't get me wrong, it's just not my cup of tea. This is why Risk of Rain 2 is such a phenomenal game for me. It doesn't have the fast-paced nature of Dead Cells nor the smoothness and fluidity of Hades, but I still prefer Risk of Rain 2 over those two games. In this video, I hope to tell you why that is the case. But before all of that, just a quick disclaimer. For the purposes of this review, I will be referring to Risk of Rain 2 as a roguelite. The terms roguelike and roguelite are pretty controversial and will more than likely spark a debate, and classifying a game if it is one or the other is so much easier said than done. I don't want anyone to say that I'm mislabeling any of the games or misrepresenting one genre. I have done some research about how to call this game and I've seen someone say that Risk of Rain 2 is a third-person shooter with roguelike elements and can be considered as a roguelike. The general consensus seems to agree with them, so I will be calling it as that. The differences between roguelike and roguelite is a pretty interesting topic that speaks a lot about how the entertainment industry becomes so oversaturated, it's hard to distinguish which is which, but it's not the point of this particular video, so let's just leave it at that. Feel free to debate down in the comments section on whether to call the game as a roguelike or roguelite, and why their distinction is important in the gaming community. Okay, back to the video. Risk of Rain 2 is an indie roguelite third-person shooter developed by Hopoo Games and published by Gearbox Publishing. It's supposed to be a direct sequel to Risk of Rain 1, but since most games of this genre typically don't care that much with plot and storylines, it doesn't matter if you played the first game or not, as you probably won't miss anything major. The only things that you will be missing if you haven't played the first game are Easter eggs and references, which I did because I haven't played the first game. Again, I don't like roguelikes and roguelites, so I probably didn't even hear about the first game until the sequel became popular. You get to choose a bunch of classes to play as, which further adds more replay value to the game that I think most roguelites today are missing. Its graphics are pretty decent, character models are what I like to call blocky, all the while containing pastel bright colors that contrast the rather drab discolored environment of the biomes. The soundtrack of the game is absolutely magnificent, ranging from melancholic melody to match the slow pacing of the first few moments of the game, to epic, mysterious guitar riffs that absolutely fit the biomes found in the game and really rile up your blood, readying you for some adrenaline-pumping encounter as you start the teleporter that would move you to the next stage. Risk of Rain 2 is pretty dynamic when it comes to its system requirements. You can play it on a rig that's 2 leagues under the recommended system requirements, but can destroy even some decent computer setups that you can build today under certain circumstances. To end this introduction, I just want to say that if you're not into roguelites, Risk of Rain 2 is a very good first roguelite that you can play to try out how games of the genre generally work, and even if you don't like the roguelike aspect of the game, it being a third-person shooter will at least give you a bunch of playtime until you get bored of it. which I can assure you will be more than 20 hours of playtime. Even without the roguelite aspect, Risk of Rain 2 is definitely a very enjoyable game to play. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to take a deep look at Risk of Rain 2. Risk of Rain 2's plotline is pretty simple, if you can even call it a plotline. It basically follows the crew of the spaceship UES Safe Travels as they try to find UES Contact Flight, which as far as I know is the ship of the crew from the first Risk of Rain that crash landed on the strange planet where both games are set in, all the while looking for any survivors along the way. Whether they find any survivors or not, the only way to get off the mysterious planet they landed on is via the escape ship found on the moon named Petrichor V, and in order to reach it, they need to utilize the teleporter technology found in the planet. And that's pretty much it. Even within roguelite standards, the story of Risk of Rain 2 is pretty weak and practically non-existent. Like I've mentioned earlier, roguelites aren't really well known for their strong narratives, but most of them have at least a simple one that players can loosely follow. The Binding of Isaac is an example of a roguelite that has a very simple plotline, in that Isaac needs to escape whatever hellhole he has found inside the chest he climbed into. The implications of the whole game are pretty deep and intricate, with numerous theories popping out here and there, but for the most part, the main plot of the game is pretty much just that. In Dead Cells, the story revolves around the beheaded and how it needs to get out of prison to eventually meet the king of the kingdom it's in. Albeit pretty strange as its first instinct is to kill the king, it does have a plotline that players can follow. Enter the Gungeon tweaks the knob a bit more to the storytelling side and introduces a variety of characters, each with their own backstories and regrets, as well as an end goal for these characters that the players will need to see through the end, namely to retrieve the legendary gun that is said to correct their wrongs. However, the game still revolves around just shooting stuff and repeating the same stages over and over again, hence its roguelite aspect. Hades, on the other hand, is pretty much the start of storytelling when it comes to roguelites, as it has a surprisingly deep and coherent storyline that players will unravel as they replay the game. Each run reveals more about Zagreus and his family tree, as well as the various Olympian gods that are aiding his escape, which, if you ask me, is a pretty nice addition for a roguelite game to have. It also further strengthens the game's already strong world building. Risk of Rain 2 doesn't have any of this. It's just straight up land on this planet, shoot anything that moves, and escape. Hell, the characters are even called survivors, even though they are the freaking rescue team that are sent to find the actual survivors from the first game, since UES Contact Light actually crash landed and UES Safe Travels did not. I know that plot isn't really that big of a deal when it comes to games of this genre, and most of them don't have compelling stories to begin with, but it still kinda pisses me off that there's so much inconsistency between the gameplay and story. And from the examples I've just given earlier, it's evident that roguelites can have a coherent plotline. But it is what it is, and Risk of Rain 2 doesn't have one. And please don't start commenting down below, maybe you should get good at the game and start collecting logbooks to get your story. Ladies and gentlemen, those are not the storyline or the plotline, those are lore. But speaking of lore, oh boy, does this game pack a bunch of them. Each enemy in the game gets its own lore entry called logbook as mentioned earlier, which you can get as a rare drop when they die. Biome logbooks on the other hand are acquired by picking them up somewhere in the area. Survivor logbooks are acquired once you beat the game, unlocking the lore entry for the character you're currently using. These logbooks pretty much tell the background of the planet where the game is set in, as well as the origins of the enemies that you fight there, as well as some backstories for the survivors. However, these survivor logbooks don't necessarily tell you who they are exactly. A good example of this is the Huntress's logbook. It tells the story of someone killed by the Huntress, so that's pretty cool and all that, but still doesn't answer the question of who the hell the Huntress really is and what she's doing on the strange planet. Is she actually part of the UES Safe Travels crew? Is she here on her own as a bounty hunter? No one knows the answers to these questions. Of course, there are some clear-cut lore for other characters like the captains and the loaders. The captain is clearly the commanding officer of UES Safe Travels, while the loader is literally a cargo loader and was asked to join the UES Safe Travels crew for the rescue mission. So basically, it's pretty much similar to how Dark Souls tells its lore, although of course Dark Souls is an actual plot that the player follows, the item descriptions are only for the lore. But Risk of Rain 2 differs as unlocking lore entries is not just through collecting items, but it is woven through its gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, Risk of Rain 2 isn't fast-paced and actually starts out pretty slow, specifically in lower difficulties. Both the enemies and your character move pretty slow as well, so unlike Dead Cells where you can move pretty fast and go to where enemies are pretty quickly, you are forced to walk huge areas to do the stuff that you need to do. Enemies do seek you out though, so unlike the aforementioned game where enemies probably won't get to you if they move from one spot except for higher BSCs, Risk of Rain 2 will force you to always be on the lookout and on the move. Enemies also spawn near the area where you are most of the time, so there really isn't any way to hide from them unless you have the ability to go invisible. Even then, it will only save you for a few seconds. While traversing each biome, you will come across various shrines which you can pay money to activate to give you various effects. These are what I like to call as soft modifiers, as their effects only last within the stage where you activated them, or their effects are instantaneous and never last for more than a few seconds. These include giving you practically a healing station, immediately spawning a wave of enemies, doubling the amount of enemies that will spawn when you activate the teleporter, or giving you a random chance to get an item by paying an increasing amount of money, which my friends and I like to call the Shrine of Gacha. There are actual modifiers that you can apply to the game that will last for as long as the run is active, but those are for the players to find out. The main objective of the players every time they reach a new biome is to look for the teleporter that will bring them to the next stage. It's just that repeatedly until they reach stage 6 where it's time to face the final boss and finally escape the planet. Of course, finding the teleporter is just the first part. It will be boring if nothing's gonna happen after activating it, so the game makes you charge the teleporter by staying in range of it, while also having to kill the teleporter boss that will spawn once the teleporter is activated. And that's pretty much the gist of the general gameplay. The thing about Risk of Rain 2 is that it doesn't have any new player traps that a lot of difficult games have today. It doesn't have enemies disguised as the environment, no enemies that like to hide and whatnot. There are no hidden environmental traps that will take you a couple of runs before you find out what's killing you. There is nothing in the game that will damage you based on RNG. Enemies' spawn animation and attacks are accompanied by sounds, so even if you don't see them spawning, you will know that you're not alone anymore and you may encounter an enemy in any second, or have to look out for an enemy attack. The game will also explicitly tell you if what you're about to interact with will damage you, or what currency it needs to activate it. Everything else that moves that you see in the game that aren't interactables or your allies is something that will definitely try to kill you. When you die in the game, it's not because the game didn't tell you that what you're about to do is bad for you. Almost 100% of the time, you dying will be your fault. And it's something that you need to keep in mind as you play the game. When it comes to character selection, you start out with only 2 characters to choose from at the beginning, and unlocking other characters takes quite a bit of time and effort to do. Randomized items you can get from chests and whatnot are also limited as items are tied in with your achievements. Meaning that if you want to get more variety of items to appear, you need to do challenges that will unlock said achievements. This also applies to unlocking other characters as well, as previously mentioned with the captain making the players beat the game in any difficulty before he becomes available as a playable character. The game can be played in multiplayer either through its public lobbies or with your friends privately, and just makes the game even infinitely better and more fun. All gameplay elements are still the same within multiplayer except of course the number of enemies that will spawn as well as the difficulty scaling, which we'll be tackling later in this video. Unlocking items also becomes easier in multiplayer as most of these collectibles become unlocked to all players currently present in the lobby, especially those that only require to activate certain stuff, or in the case of unlocking the captain, beating the game together, regardless if you're dead or alive at the end of the game. All of these are meant to incentivize doing another run after you die or beat the final boss, and the game locking items behind achievements encourages players to play the game more and put actual replay value in the game. Before you know it, you're more than eager to start another run after you die in hopes of unlocking another character or another item that will spice up the next runs you will inevitably do, and hopefully beat the final boss to experience that sweet euphoria as you feel your adrenaline disappearing from your body, and all you are left with is the desire to play more, but this time on a higher difficulty. Being a roguelite, Risk of Rain 2's emphasis is all about repeating the same 6 stages over and over again that cycles between 9 biomes. Stages 1 to 3 each has 2 biomes that will be randomly picked, Stage 4 has 3, while stages 5 and 6 have fixed biomes. All biomes in the game are not procedurally generated as opposed to one might think, but instead they follow a simple layout and the game slightly changes the map based on it. Now that may make you think that, wow, that sounds like the kind of boring that you hated with Hades, but trust me, it's a lot more different than you think it is. Few of the major things that the game changes that makes each run feel different are the terrain and block of paths. In one run, you might be seeing more cliffs and caves than open spaces in one of the biomes of Stage 1, but it's the other way around when you start another run. One path may be open now, but it might be closed when you start a new run. But the main focus of the randomness of Risk of Rain 2's map generation is the placements of chests, teleporters, and shrines. You wouldn't really be walking around admiring the scenery each time you reach a new biome, although they do look gorgeous and fascinating. You're in there to look for chests, to find items to upgrade your character, or look for where the teleporter is located so you can move on to the next stage. Just with those subtle changes, it would be hard to notice that the game uses the same map layout available to each biome. However, since each run uses practically the same layout each time, it will be easy for you to find the important items that you need in them, like the teleporter, certain chests that are exclusive to certain biomes, or interactables that you need to find in order to spawn a new enemy or spawn a portal to a hidden biome once you have played the game long enough. I think Risk of Rain 2's loop is the perfect allegory to how people don't want change but also don't want stagnation. The game's stage generation retains all the familiarity players may have with the biomes after playing for a few hours, all the while still making it fresh by changing just a tiny bit of the area and how certain objects spawn. No matter how similar each map variant looks like, they will never ever be the same, and I think that's just plain awesome. But of course, that's not where the replay value of a roguelite lies. As mentioned earlier, item upgrades are locked behind achievements and you only have a handful of these from the start. These items will be the necessary upgrades you will need in order to progress and make your character so powerful even bosses will feel like normal mobs at some point. This is why replaying the game will also be an important aspect as it allows you to unlock more powerful items that you will be randomly getting from chests. The variety of items you can get from these allows for a very diverse build path that you can do for your characters. And true to the game's roguelite nature, it will take a lot of experimentation to see what build will suit your character and playstyle. Every run you do will not guarantee that you will get the same items that you did in your previous run, so being adaptive and flexible to any playstyle is a core skill to have. However, the reason why I think Risk of Rain 2 has a lot more replay value than other roguelikes and roguelites that I have played is its diverse choice of characters. I also think this is where Hades is lacking as the reason why I didn't like the game. Hades only gives you 6 weapons to choose from, and after that, the only things that you will be unlocking are the weapons' different aspects, which are basically just the same weapons but with different effects. I am aware that the last aspect of each weapon changes their playstyle, but the amount of effort needed to unlock them seems not worth it for me, especially if there are only 6 weapons to choose from every time I start a run. Plus, you also just play one character, namely Zagreus, and the places you visit in each subsequent run doesn't really change at all. Do enough runs and you have practically seen the entirety of the underworld. You can say the same for Risk of Rain 2 since they both use the same technique when it comes to map generation, but this one has a lot of characters you can choose from which ultimately differentiated it from Hades in my opinion. As of writing the script, there are currently 11 available characters to choose from, each having their own sets of abilities, synergies, and playstyles. Just from that alone, the game already offers a lot of replay value. Pair it with the ability to experiment with item synergies, make for a really long playtime of the game. But that's not where it ends. Not only are you going to complete challenges and unlock achievements to get new characters, you also need to do them to unlock other loadouts for your characters, because they come with multiple modes of engagements that will totally change your way of playing them. Well, for some of them anyways. The character multi is the best example for this. When you first unlock it, it starts with 2 modes of primary fire. A rapid-fire nail gun that shoots out a burst of shrapnel when it stops shooting, and a rebar puncher that shoots out reinforcement bars at high speed. However, you can unlock 2 more primary fire for it, namely the scrap launcher that will shoot rockets at a designated area, and the Power Saw that allows multi to become a melee-type character and shred enemies to pieces up close and personal. It also has the ability to use 2 modes of primary fire at once, which adds more to the diversity of its playstyle. You can equip one ranged mode of fire and the melee one to protect yourself from all kinds of enemies, or you can equip 2 rapid-fire nail guns to utilize his ability called Power Mode that allows him to simultaneously use his 2 primary modes of fire at once, resulting in multi literally becoming a mobile machine gun that will just obliterate everything in its line of sight. You see what I'm getting at here? Using the fast-hitting attacks of multi will change your build path to items that offer on-hit effects like bleeding and whatnot, while choosing the hard-hitting modes of attack will change your dessert items to those that offer raw-powered items that will help you one-shot enemies as much as you can. To be fair, not all characters have diverse loadouts like multi, but most of them do, albeit not as diverse. For example, the engineer can become literally an infinite supply of healing turrets thanks to his turret's abilities to inherit the effects of items the engineer himself picks up. So just pick up some of those bustling fungus that creates a small healing area when you stand still, and you will make his turrets heal every allied unit in its small surrounding. If you unlock his walking turrets, however, you can switch up by picking up on-hit effect items to absolutely destroy anything the turrets see. And that's only 2 characters we're talking about and 2 examples of varying build paths. You have 9 other characters to choose from and 100 of item combinations for each. Once you've unlocked all the currently available characters in the game, it's just a matter of choosing which one you like to play as on a run, so you're not stuck with just a single character running the same places over and over again until you reach the final boss of the game and finally beat it. Or maybe don't fight the final boss at all. We have established that Risk of Rain 2's main focus is playing the game over and over again whether you die or beat the game, as is with all other roguelike games. But what if you get tired of that? What if you don't want your run to be finished and you just want to continuously fight enemies of increasing power while making yourself just as more powerful? Well, do just that. Upon reaching stage 5, players have the choice of either continuing to stage 6 to try and beat the final boss of the game, or realign the primordial teleporter back to the planet and loop back to stage 1, now called stage 6 by the game, and continuously do so until they decide to align the primordial teleporter to the moon and reach the final area of the game. In the long run, this doesn't have any major implications in gameplay other than stress testing your character and your own skills, although reaching stage 8 by looping back and going through the first 3 sets of biomes, they can enter a portal to unlock a character and end the run abruptly. Other than that though, it's nothing more than a challenge that players can deliberately take to test their skills. But this also means to never end the game if you're satisfied with your current run and just want to kill enemies over and over again. And don't you worry about enemies getting under-leveled, because as you play the game, you will realize that you will never actually over-level in this game. And with that, it's time to finally talk about level progression and how the game deals with difficulty. Difficulty in Risk of Rain 2 works quite a bit differently than other games in that it never stays on that difficulty, making gameplay feel more frantic and unique aside from the random items you get from chests. The game offers you 3 difficulty levels to choose from before starting a run: Drizzle, Rainstorm, and Monsoon, which corresponds to easy, normal, and hard difficulties respectively. This is called the initial difficulty. This mainly affects the player's starting stats, namely health regeneration multiplier, and a bonus armor when playing on Drizzle. Playing on Rainstorm and Monsoon removes the bonus armor, and players start with a lower health regeneration multiplier, making enemy attacks much more dangerous. But what's to note about Risk of Rain 2's difficulty is its scaling difficulty. Unlike most games where difficulty is pretty much static and only scales either from where you are at a particular point in the game or how strong your character is, Risk of Rain 2 scales the game's difficulty with the passage of time. When you start a run, you probably have noticed the bar with the sub-difficulties easy, normal, hard, and so on and so forth at the top right corner of the screen, together with various information like the time elapsed since you started the run and your chosen initial difficulty. As you might have guessed, the longer you play the game, the stronger the enemies become. The game won't wait until you progress through another area or if your characters become strong enough. If you get left behind by enemy levels, you have no choice but to find a way to scale your level back up to match theirs. This is why I said in the beginning of this section that enemies don't get underleveled, because it's just going to become underleveled instead. This is also why looping back at the start of the game instead of beating the final boss is still challenging, even if it means going back to the first stage where enemy types are relatively weaker, because every enemy increases in level over time and their numbers start to grow as well. The game also starts to spawn enemies outside of their biomes in high enough difficulties, as well as enemies with buffs exclusive to looping a run, which makes looping even more interesting. And of course, it uses the spawning strategy, make bosses a normal mob unit, so don't be surprised if you see magma worms infesting a biome without a boss health bar appearing on the screen. There are a lot of calculations going on to determine how fast the sub-difficulty moves, which can warrant its own video, so we won't be tackling it here. But what this all means is that the initial difficulty is literally just that. It's how hard the game will be only at the beginning. The game will catch up no matter what you do, and all difficulty levels will eventually become equal. It's just a matter of how much time you have at the beginning to prepare for the inevitable, which is why playing on Drizzle seems pretty easy, as by the time the sub-difficulty catches up, your character is more than powerful enough to survive vicious onslaughts. And of course, it goes without saying that playing with multiple people and playing on higher initial difficulties significantly affect how fast the sub-difficulty moves, among other things that scales differently depending on the number of people present and the chosen initial difficulty. This is why Risk of Rain 2 doesn't become boring over time, and every run you take feels really fresh and unique, even though in reality, you're only really running variations of the same 9 maps. Just with the scaling difficulty alone is enough to give players a challenging experience that will truly test their skills, paired with the ability to loop back to the beginning of the game without restarting the run, makes for a very fun and thrilling experience. Roguelikes and roguelites are such fascinating genres that we have today, as they stemmed from one singular game many decades ago, and people just fell so in love with it, it spawned a bunch of games of different genres with its aspects intertwined with it. Risk of Rain 2 is just one of the many results of that love, and like with most roguelite games before it, has definitely lived up to the legacy of its progenitor. With its variety of characters to choose from, each having their own sets of abilities and different playstyles, repeating the game right from the start when you die doesn't make the game feel repetitive, and the time it takes before you get bored of it is pretty long. There's absolutely meta-item combinations that characters would greatly benefit from, but that won't stop you from experimenting yourself with crazy builds, which makes playing these various characters very different from player to player. All maps are handcrafted as well and has a particular layout that the game follows for it to randomize every variant, which makes for a fresh yet pretty familiar experience as you traverse the stages. Its scaling difficulty will make sure that the game always feels challenging and will never fail to spawn encounters that players might deem too easy. Even if enemies die in 2 to 3 hits because of how overpowered your characters become, there's still the risk of dying in one hit yourself as enemies become stronger as time elapses. There are still a lot of mechanics and game modes that I haven't talked about, but I think the rest of the game is best experienced by the players themselves. The alternate game modes alone will make you sink in more than 20 hours into the game, not including the time that you will spend playing the main game mode. Risk of Rain 2 is definitely a very good game, and is proof that sometimes you don't need elaborate plotlines and narratives to deliver a compelling, thrilling gameplay that you can play for hours on end. Sometimes you need procedurally generated maps and characters to make a game replayable. Sometimes all you need is a clear line of sight to your main objective, killing just about everything you come across for the safety of your own self, wading through the hordes of enemies that you will encounter, and trying again once you fail. Sometimes all you need to have is the courage to brave the risk of rain.